Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our talks with Walt, and we now turn to what some have said is maybe the most anthologized of any of the poems of Leaves of Grass, I Hear America Singing. Now this one is poem number 18 out of 24 of the inscriptions poems, and I just want to pause for a moment and just remind us of where we've been. After the brief introductory comments, we have now worked through 17 poems. Oneself I Sing, As I Pondered in Silence, and Cabin Ships at Sea, To Foreign Lands, To a Historian, To Thee, O Cause, Eidolons, For Him I Sing, When I Read the Book, Beginning My Studies, Beginners, To the States. We're going to talk a little bit about why that one I'm pausing on Journeys Through the States, likewise, to a certain Cantorchechi, as well as Me and Perturb and Savantism, and The Ship Starting is the one we just finished with. And now finally, I Hear America Singing. Let's just point out for our notes right away, we are 18 poems in to Leaves of Grass. And finally, the word America will get used for the first time. I think that's an important observation, and it allows for us to be able to now jump right into this poem. And actually, we're going to see this poem is quite different in some fundamental ways from every poem that has come before in inscriptions. Now, because of the nature of the work I get to do in 303, I have given a number of different lectures on this set of lines, and you can go on to Learn Strong and find those. But now I'm going to give specifically a Talks with Walt set of comments. And since we're there, let's talk about assumptions really quickly. I do assume that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down the left-hand side, find the folder that says Talks with Walt. I'm hoping that you have been paying attention and following the previous lectures so that I can call on them. Obviously, I just made a few observations just now about those. And I'm hoping that you're familiar with some of the other lectures that I've given that are maybe going to have different points of reference in regards to this classic poem. Again, just to remind, we are the stories that we tell. Can I say it this way, though, this way? We are the songs we sing and re-sing. We're the songs we decide to accept. We are the songs that we decide to reject as well. Our learning theory is also assumed here. The new is the new. The NEW is the KNEW. And we're singing songs that are really, really ancient songs without often realizing it. Our annotative approach, of course, in our attempt to try to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways is, of course, to try to ask three guiding questions. What does I Hear America Singing say? Summary. What does it mean at 2A Themes Messages? And, of course, we're really going to concentrate at 2B on the rhetorical, poetic techniques that Whitman will be using. And then finally, how can I relate to this information in some meaningful way? How can I relate to other kinds of texts that we've already studied? Of course, I've already made the observation that it's interesting. This will be the first mention in Leaves of Grass of the actual word America. Before it was something like the States, and he had other kind of metaphors as well. Here, finally, it is the very word America itself. In many ways, you could argue, Whitman makes America through Leaves of Grass. He defines what America, the word, actually means. So that when we start talking about America or Americans, it in large measure is a Whitman-esque idea. It's an invention, actually, of Whitman himself, and we'll begin to see it right here in this poem. And then finally, can I own this material? Can I challenge myself to walk away with something? We're going to ask you by the end of this poem, what is the song you sing, and how do you sing it? We also, of course, assume that you're familiar with our Big Five, epistemology. What does this text say about how we know things, about who we are ontologically, about the study, psychology of the individual mind, sociology, the group mind, and finally, the question of theodicy. How can we learn from the pain and suffering? Notice, we're not going to have a lot of pain and suffering in this poem. This is going to be a poem filled with optimism. That is to say, it's an American poem. Finally, the 5 P's of Whitman. Whitman as person, as poet, as pedagogue or teacher or instructor. We might even say as band leader or listener to the band and the singing. Whitman as politician and his love of democracy. Here, obviously, we'll be making some observations, as well as Whitman as philosopher. Now, for just a little bit of background information, and again, we always refer to our to our Nortons here. This poem, first published in Leaves of Grass in 1860, is number 20 of Chance Democratic, and for the next edition in 1867, Whitman had achieved the title, and the first line we now know an inspired improvement upon the original American Mouth Songs was the original title of this one. The poem was transferred to inscriptions in 1881. Now, invariably and inevitably, the poem has received many musical adaptations, obviously, notably as a cantata for mixed voices by Harvey B. Gall from 1925, George Clesinger in 1941. It also became the title song of a group of Walt Whitman's poems for mixed voices by Norman Lockwood in 1954, and has continued to serve powerfully the idea of the singer and the song. Now, what's interesting is that Whitman is a singer, but in this poem he isn't singing. Let's put this in our notes. Whitman isn't singing in this poem. He is a listener. He is an observer. He is hearing America singing. Now, the use of the word America as a collective, as a representative idea will be profound. By the way, notice the anaphoria just before we read the poem. Of all of those these in order, we got about 7 of them that start lines, so we're going to be paying attention to that. We've also got 13 different, so put it in your notes at level 1, 13 different kinds of people that will be referenced as being America. Okay, now why is that important? Because when we pick up Langston Hughes's classic that we've given a lecture on, I Too Am America, we're going to be paying attention to what's left out of this. Again, it's so profound to pay attention to not just what's in these poems, but what's not in these poems. I hear America singing. The varied carols I hear. Varied here obviously is a key. Multi, always it's about many, right? Those of, and now we're going to get the 13 listed. Let's just go through them quickly. Mechanics, we've already said how much Whitman loves the physics of industry. Mechanics, each one singing as it should be, blithe and strong. Now the strong makes sense. What is up with this word blithe? Cheerful indifference? It almost seems like a don't tell me what to do kind of phrase, blithe. Notice we've got our carpenter, number 2, singing his, as he measures his plank or beam. Now obviously, America is a building country, but it's significant that he mentions the carpenter early on for those who are paying attention to his religious overtones. Obviously, Jesus was the son of a carpenter, right? The mason, obviously the brickmaker, singing his as he makes ready for work or leaves off work. In other words, going to and from work. This is significant because of the first 3 mentioned of mechanics, carpenters, and masons. Masons probably have the hardest of the 3 jobs. Physically demanding, and yet notice, singing to prepare, singing, obviously, when he leaves from work. The 4th one is the boatman singing what belongs to him in his boat, and then the deckhand singing on the steamboat deck. Now, Whitman made a trip, Whitman is person here, down to New Orleans and on the Mississippi River, like Twain, who had much reverence for a whole lot of what Whitman was trying to pull off. Very influenced by the boats, the steamboats on the Mississippi, and the ways in which that river had so much to do with the industry of America. The shoemaker, we think about Thoreau, of course, going in to have his shoe fixed in our study of Walden, and that's when he ended up getting put in jail for a night because he hadn't paid his tax, right? The shoemaker singing as he sits on his bench, the hatter singing as he stands. We often forget this, that hats were a huge part of the culture of the day. Whitman himself will have several photographs with different hats on, and at one point in the 1855 edition of Song of Myself, he'll talk about the way he wants to cock his hat in the way he hopes it will go. He wants it to go. So hats are important here. Next at number 8, we've got the woodcutter. Obviously, a lot of that happening as we learned from our study of Thoreau's Walden. The plowboys, obviously working the agricultural land on his way in the morning, or at noon intermission, or at sundown. Notice, in other words, working all day, around the clock, we might say. Now, all of these, up through number 9 of the plowmen, of people, are all male, right? But then notice that we're going to have the first introduction of an adjective other than blithe, but here it's directly before singing, so it's the first time in the poem, with the word delicious and it will be the delicious singing of the mother. Now we're going to get to this later for Whitman as person when we talk from, starting at Paumanok, about Whitman and his relationship to his mother. He idolized her in profound ways, and here we're going to see a mother or of the young wife. We can add that as the number 11, right? At work, or of the girl, number 12, sewing or washing. Now these could all be the same, or they could be somehow separated. But the point that we want to make is Whitman is including both masculine as well as feminine as being the songs that make America. And then each singing what belongs to him or her and to no one else. Now it is this independence of no one else, this individuality that will in many ways stamp Whitman as the great celebrator of American independence, right? We all sing our own kind of voice song. We all sing our own dream, if you will. And then he comes back to talk about day and night. The day, what belongs to the day, and then notice the use of the dash, and reminding us of Emily Dickinson's use of dashes. At night, the party of young fellows, robust, friendly. This word robust is a key word again, strength for Whitman. And notice it's about community. This is the part of our sociology. The community, we're all together. Now all of America is singing, but at night you've got a group of young guys who are out having a good time. Robust, friendly, the idea that they enjoy getting to know and meet others. Singing with open mouths. Now this open mouths is central, right? That is to say, not afraid, not ashamed to sing, no matter whether you can sing well or not. Open mouths, they're strong, melodious. Notice earlier it was delicious, now it's melodious. And well, I mean, Whitman's always doing this kind of thing where these sounds that kind of go together. Melodious songs, these strong melodious songs. By the way, we pointed this out in the ship starting in our last discussion of the power of the S sibilant, that S sound. And just read through this again and pay attention to the profound way that he can play around with sounds. Let's work now really quickly at 2A. Well, what is America? Notice here, Whitman isn't singing. Whitman is listening to all of the singing. And what is it? Well, it's an America that's defined by what? Working and singing, joy. In other words, America is a country that loves to work, that loves to grow things, that loves to challenge, right? All of us are in our own ways, he says, singing. And that's what makes America. Now, of course, we pointed out the significance of the opera, right, as we said in an earlier set of comments about to a certain country. We are playing around with the idea that America is this hymn, right? The battle hymn of the Republic would, of course, be the language from the Civil War time, right? At 2B, of course, the symbolism here is of the working, singing America and American. We obviously have the anaphoria of the 7 times, the repetition of the over and over again. At 3A, how do we relate this to other texts and titles? I just want to point out that we are in the tradition of the Homeric muse tradition, the chanting of songs. And remember what we said about our discussions of Iliad 9. When Odysseus goes to get Achilles to bring him back to the war, he finds him doing what? Sitting in his tent with his pal Patroclus, singing songs of old warriors on a lyre. This idea then of singing and of listening to the singing, of being receptive to the singing, is central to an ancient tradition that we would call obviously Homeric and Virgilian. Although it's fascinating to pick up Dante and Milton and Shakespeare and to pay attention to the number of references to singing and the ways in which singing and songs are so compelling for both positive and negative. I mean, think about Desdemona singing her Willow song at the end of Othello and the provocative challenge that is, right? Or Ophelia, for example, picking her flowers and her little melodies as she is playing it out at the end of her life. Both positive and negative singing, right? How are we gonna somehow own a poem like this personally? Well, I think it would be an interesting question to ask. First of all, the list that makes America America. Let's play Langston Hughes's project first. I too am America. I too sing America. What's missing from this list for Whitman, from his own day and then from our own time? Can we expand the list of singers? I'm certain that Whitman will argue throughout Leaves of Grass that's exactly what he's doing. And he writes the rest of the poems of Leaves of Grass to kind of expand that catalog so that by the time we get to a poem like Passage to India, it's amazing the number of singer songs that he will be referencing there. That's worldwide, not just America itself. How about this? Do you think of America as still a nation of singers? Or do you see us as predominantly a nation of complainers or whiners? It's a disturbing question. I think Whitman would like a question like this. And then finally, how about you? Are you a singer, fundamentally? Or are you more of a complainer or a whiner? Notice how embedded in that question is Whitman's theodicy. Of course there's pain and suffering in the world. But how do you respond to that? Do you ask, why did this happen to me? Or do you rather sing, why did this happen for me? There's got to be something I can learn through this experience as I take responsibility for my own life. Notice how singing then becomes for America a mantra regarding its freedom, its independence, each in its own singing, and to never be ashamed of the song that one would sing. Well, Whitman clearly challenging us with this really famous poem. Again, go back to some of the other lectures I've given on this poem as well to kind of flesh out all the ways one can enjoy this poem. Thank you.